You don't need me to tell you that chapters 3 and 4 have totally turned Deltarune theory crafting upside down. For as much new information we've learned, just as many questions have been raised. Kris is obviously the center of a lot of this discussion, and rightfully so. Kris's character has become so much more complicated throughout these chapters, and there's honestly probably more to talk about than we will even be able to fully cover in the next year before chapter 5 is released. As our starting point, we've gotten clarification on the dynamic between Kris and the Soul. We're shown very clearly in the weird route that Kris is not down for it, but still doesn't ultimately reject the Soul. Kris's anger at the Soul for pursuing the weird route gives us an anchoring point in exploring how we as the player are going to shape the story in both the normal and the weird route. Kris and the Soul's connection to Gaster has also begun to bubble up to the surface, and I believe that we're finally at a point where we can start to more concretely examine Gaster's motivations as his influence over Deltarune's world has started to come more clearly into view. Going forward, I'm going to assume that you've already played all of the chapters up to this point and have a base familiarity with who Gaster is. I imagine that this isn't going to be an issue because if you're watching this video, you're probably a crazed Deltarune person needing their Deltarune analysis fix. So let's get into it. Gaster's dialogue upon losing the night fight in Chapter 3 is the first time Gaster has intervened in any capacity in either Undertale or Deltarune. Intervention may be a strong word, since he ultimately leaves the decision to the player, but it's a cornerstone moment that can't be underemphasized. It gives us surprising insight into how he views Kris and other characters with Gaster connections that we could previously only speculate on by his sort of clinical sounding observations in the Chapter 1 save menu. What do I mean by this? First, let's just take another look at the dialogues you can get by losing the night fight. Very interesting. Your loss here is all but guaranteed, and yet you persist. If you are so determined to try once more, then shall we hasten? And so, you meet with the same fate. Shall you try once more? Incredible. I felt your power shining, a little further. Very interesting. You are missing something important. You won't win like this. Still, will you persist? I really love the community reaction to these lines and the portrayal of Gaster as like a sports fan rooting the player on. It's really just very cool to get a Gaster pep talk here, especially with the Chapter 3 ERAM and night fights being fairly significant difficulty spikes compared to previous chapters. It's like, bro, how am I gonna let my boy Gaster down? But there's some interesting subtext that Gaster's dialogue here creates upon a closer examination. The big takeaway from these lines is that it demonstrates Gaster's lack of concern over Kris's motivation in the fight. It shows us that while Kris, despite being connected to Gaster through being controlled by the player, has their own clear motivation in the fight, which is to lose it, doesn't align with any discernible goal of Gaster's. Gaster is not particularly invested in the expected outcome of the fight. Kris wants to lose, Gaster is unconcerned either way. Gaster only shows interest when we, the player, decide to persist, despite Kris having a contradictory goal in the fight. It shows us that Gaster is more concerned with fishing for an outcome or sequence of events that deviates from the expected outcome. This is not normal or weird route exclusive. It appears that from Gaster's perspective, the normal and weird route are both possibilities that are amongst his expected outcomes. He never intervenes in either of them, and only has enough interest to interject himself in a moment that defies his expectation. If you decide to disappoint Papa Gaster and give up, there is no dialogue making special note of it. That's because giving up and losing the fight means that your particular actions on this save file are not outside of Gaster's expectations for the progression of the story. What does this say about the weird route exactly? I've always been under the impression that the weird route is really the end-all be-all of consuming every morsel of information a crazy Deltarune fan could want. Narratively, it certainly looks this way from the characters' perspectives. Ralsei's dialogue regarding the weird route has some of the most ominous undertones of any text in the game so far. Quick shout out to my homie Ralsei. People have been shitting on him for quite some time now, and it's nice to see that yes, Ralsei is his own individual with his own complex motivations. But is viewing the weird route from the main cast perspective actually the correct way to think about it? For as interestingly and seemingly off the beaten path the weird route is, Gaster thus far has not taken any particular note of it. This has only become extremely unusual because Gaster does take an interest in the Chapter 3 night fight. It suggests that Gaster's view of either route is not really what's interesting. What Gaster seems to be interested in is action that the story considers impossible, or at the very least, far beyond the scope of what could reasonably be expected. The night fight is the first instance where Deltarune has gone to some lengths to let us know that the fight would be impossible, or at the very least, very difficult even if we have the Shadow Mantle. Nothing about the normal or weird routes themselves has this quality. The normal route is the default path of the story. The weird route is only weird because it's a divergence from the normal route, not because it's actually particularly difficult to acquire or represents something that shouldn't be able to happen. So, while the player sees the weird route as a monumental shift in Deltarune's world, it may not actually be so consequential from a Gasterian perspective. I'm sorry. Keep this in mind, as there's more to be said further in about whether the weird route is actually as anomalous an outcome as we're currently led to believe. It's important to note that the night fight dialogue and other Gasterisms that we're going to be taking a look at in this video are not going to be particularly revelatory about what exactly Gaster's endgame is. Currently, I don't think there's enough information for us to reasonably grapple with what it is specifically that Gaster is looking for or hoping to achieve. However, I think what we can begin to unravel is a faint outline from the primordial Gaster ooze of the nature of the relationship Kris, the player, and other characters have with Gaster and the world of Deltarune itself. I've always thought Undertale holds a lot of valuable information that can be used to analyze the future of Deltarune, and that the remaining mysteries in Undertale would begin to bleed over into Deltarune. Chapters 3 and 4 have demonstrated this to likely be true. The Goners were really the first thing I learned about that made me super obsessed with Undertale. They have a surreal, cosmic horror quality that is almost completely removed from Undertale's main plot, but hint at something that goes far deeper and makes you wonder, okay, so what I'm doing here is pretty cool, but maybe this other thing is actually where the meat and potatoes of this world is. They kind of give you the same liminal spaces feeling that people talk about when describing Mario 64's setting. The nature of their existence is mostly shrouded in mystery, and, fittingly, the Goners referred to as Gaster followers are the only real means we have to learn about Gaster's history in Undertale outside of the True Lab entries. The Goner Maker sequence in Deltarune let us know that this was a mystery that was going to be carried over, but after the sequence, there's been no other mentioning of them thus far, with only lighteners that are essentially analogs of the Undertale Goners being present to serve as an eerie reminder to keep them in the back of our mind as we occasionally brush past them while we're interacting with every possible tile in Hometown to devour every ounce of flavor text we can get our disgusting grubby hands on. But that's not particularly interesting in itself, since even in Undertale, the Goners all have regular NPC counterparts, aside from one particular example that we will be looking at later in this video. But for the first time in a long time, we see that there is a growing connection to the Goners and Kris. In Chapters 3 Egg Room, the Rudens mention photocopies referring to themselves as monochrome, but Kris colored them in with care. It's striking because it harkens back to the Goners being monochrome and reveals to us that it is possible to add color to copies that have no color. We've only seen the reverse of this so far, with Clamgirl and Undertale becoming a Goner after telling us that we'll be meeting Susie soon. What does this tell us about the nature of Goners exactly if we're operating under the assumption that copies being monochrome is intended to reference Goners? I think Goner Kid's dialogue in Undertale, reflecting on the idea that a world in which you don't exist could carry on as if nothing was wrong, is a good starting place. It characterizes the Goners as ephemeral entities that share the gastery feeling of being both present and absent. The Goners are literally ephemeral beings, since they only come into existence under a specific condition, a correct fun value, and just as quickly pop out of existence. Clamgirl was Undertale's parting gift to us prior to Deltarune, and she was unique from the other Goners in Undertale because we meet her as a normal, colorful monster. After she tells us we'll be meeting Susie, she turns gray and disappears in the way the other Goners do. It establishes that there is something that can occur to cause a character to become a Goner. It still leaves us with a lingering question though in the context of chapters 3 and 4 of Deltarune. We see Clamgirl go from not being a Goner to being a Goner. The Rudens in chapter 3 Egg Room seem to imply that there is a reverse process where a Goner can have its color restored or can be given color where it lacks. The Rudens comment brings up two major possibilities, each of which have significant narrative implications for how they're going to ultimately be tied to Deltarune. Possibility 1. Kris coloring the Rudens from their monochrome states have resulted in the Rudens going from being goners to no longer being goners. If this is the case, it presents Kris as having a role that may represent Kris's existence as being a direct opposite of Gaster's position in the story. If a character being a goner or turning into a goner represents moving closer in proximity to Gaster, then it follows that a goner gaining color is moving further away in proximity to Gaster. If Kris is capable of that, it would make me think that goners and those who are strongly associated with Gaster are going to start playing a more direct, probably disruptive role in the story. If Kris has the ability to restore a goner's color that we learn about in an egg room, which is already a pretty Gastery place, it's likely that there would be an antagonistic force that would require Kris to use this ability in opposition to it. It would even make a believable pivotal moment in the conflict between Kris and the player. As the player, would we be given options that allow us to essentially decide between Kris's desired outcome or Gaster's? Gaster is the first encounter we have in Deltarune, where we're immediately established as being connected to him. It's likely that at some point we're going to learn more about how exactly we ended up controlling Kris, as it's always appeared that our controlling Kris was not Gaster's original intention. Would there become a moment in the plot where Gaster's motivations would become more concrete, and there's a legitimate reason the player might be conflicted between what Kris wants versus what Gaster wants? Obviously, that's just spitballing. On the opposite side of that, if Kris is able to ungonerify someone, that could just as easily be set up as something that would cause the Fun Gang to be aligned with Gaster in the plot. Since it's totally possible that Gaster's Gaster state is actually what Gaster is trying to ungaster, and would likely be a major factor in what is required to find her. Since the person talking in the unused text, it's Des, come on, seems like they are in a state of existence similar to how Gaster is described in Undertale as being shattered across time and space. The important takeaway from this subsection is that if this framing of the Rudens comment is correct, the state of being a goner is likely going to become an opposing force in the future, and Kris's ability to bring color to them is going to act as a force in dealing with that conflict. Possibility 2. Kris coloring the Rudens from their monochrome state have not changed the fact that they are goners. If this is the case, I think it hints that Kris's connection to the goners is going to be more heavily emphasized as a corollary for their own lack of identity. I think it would also lay the groundwork for exploring the currently unclear reason why Kris seems to be reliant on the soul for something, even though there are times when Kris is completely at odds with what the player is doing, yet still ends up putting the soul back in their body. The conflict I can see arising out of this scenario is the vessel we created in the Gonder Maker reappearing and playing some sort of antagonistic role where Kris is forced to confront the vessel or the tension related to their own existence. Kris's reliance on the soul for whatever reason, and the phone call in the holiday residence that further hint at that reliance, are indicative of that relationship moving to the foreground of the plot. The Chapter 4 Egg Room should leave us with little doubt that whatever role goners are going to play in Deltarune, it's rapidly approaching. When Kris is drawing, their sketches are layered over each other until there is just a monochrome smear left on the canvas, from which Kris draws an image of a tree over it. It's somewhat analogous to the Rudens in Man Country talking about how Kris gave them color, even though the painting is implied to be black and gray. Something original is able to be produced from what is originally just a monochrome copy. The painting in the egg room references this. Multiple sketches are layered over top of each other until they're just a monochrome smear, over which the still life of the tree is produced. The fact that Kris is the one who picks up the pencil and not you is really significant here. If the new references to colorlessness and being monochromatic are reintroducing goners to the plot, Kris being the one picking up the pencil seems to be emphasizing Kris's connection to them. It wouldn't be as impactful if it was you picking up the pencil. It's a strange moment where the narrative is emphasizing Kris as an individual entirely separately from the player, and reflecting on some facet of Kris's past, presumably prior to being possessed by the soul. If you interact with the sink after the drawing is complete, you get flavor text that a faint gray crease glittered stubbornly and that you can never wash it all away. The common interpretation is that Kris has done something in their past that they deeply regret and are repressing, and the sync flavor text is a reminder that Kris cannot wash away their past. I don't think that's controversial given the information we currently have, and I largely agree with this interpretation as of chapters 3 and 4. But there is more to this line of flavor text than just that. First, it provides evidence for the interpretation that adding color or washing away the monochrome does not fully erase its nature. Kris may be able to wash their hands of graphite from a pencil, but that washing away does not erase the base reality of whatever memory Kris is trying to repress. Second, this line gives us an avenue for Gaster to once again intervene at some point in the future. It's an example of a significant plot-related event that refers to the impossible. You can never wash it all away. If Gaster's primary interest lies in the seemingly impossible, Kris and or the player's attempt at rectifying or coming to terms with whatever's going on in this scene or in Kris's past could become an overwhelming obstacle that Gaster would take interest in.
Moving on.
I'm honestly kind of terrified of this guy. It was already kind of weird that this Rudin refers to the town by player name town in chapter 2. Like, of all places for my choices in Gasterville to show up, it shows up in my cute little castle town that's supposed to be my escape from the hellscape that is the real world. Initially, there's not really much you can really do with that information, so you just kind of say, okay, and move on. But now he's actually like legitimately terrifying. I actually didn't interact with him in my pacifist playthrough, so my first encounter with him was on my weird route playthrough where I chose as many of the bad options as I could and killed everything, which, as the story progresses, is actually chipping away at my soul every time. It did kind of crack me up though when he said my town's love was cracked, but what's relevant for us in the context of this discussion is the fact that he's changed color, and even notes that his color has faded and to pay it no mind. It's obviously reminiscent of Clam Girl, whose color faded as we learn she is, or has become a goner. The Rudin's knowledge of the player's name and the fact that their color is changing is, very gonery. It wouldn't be so goner-coded if he hadn't referenced that his color was fading, since it just looks like he's blue to us. The text goes out of its way to let us know, hey, this guy who has knowledge of the Goner Maker stuff is losing his color, not that his color has changed. Oh, and he keeps tabs on all that shit you're getting into. Remember my mentioning of the bird NPC with a Goner counterpart in Undertale referred to as Gaster follower number 3 who has no Undertale normal monster equivalent? Let's talk about that.
Bird up.
I briefly mentioned the Lightners who are similar to the Goners from Undertale in the introduction. All of the Goners in Undertale are based on other NPCs you can find throughout the underground, and all of these NPCs also exist in Deltarune. The notable exception, though, is the Gaster Follower 3. Gaster Follower 3 does not have an analog NPC that you can encounter in Undertale, but in Deltarune, we can find Striped Bird in the library who blocks us from reading the upstairs books. After each chapter, excluding chapter 3 where we don't have a chance to visit the library, it moves back enough for us to read a new entry. Not only is Striped Bird unique in that it is a new NPC that has a Goner counterpart in Undertale, it is unique in that unlike all the other NPCs who have an Undertale Goner counterpart, Striped Bird also seems to be fucked right up. Let's look at the progression of Striped Bird's dialogue in each chapter. Chapter 1. I love reading books, especially the books upstairs. You should really read them. Chapter 2. I love reading books, especially the books upstairs. I love reading, especially books. Chapter 4. I love reading, especially, the books upstairs. The books upstairs. The books are, love. Chapter 4 Lake Dialogue. Don't wait, especially the don't. Don't. So we can see that there has been something wrong with this NPC from the very beginning. It's not obvious at all in Chapter 1 because while the text is slightly odd, it could easily be seen as an eccentric speech pattern. Chapter 2's lines are increasingly strange, but still not really totally unbelievable. But Chapter 4 definitively lets us know that there is something very unusual with this NPC, and whatever that unusual thing is has actually been present from the very beginning. It's important to note that after you talk to it at the lake and leave and then come back, it's no longer there. This, along with the glitchy, filtered screen and empty dialogue choice box we see when Susie asks what we were talking to Noelle about in the Weird Route, causes me to rethink the structure of Deltarune's world. I think many of us have largely taken for granted that the layering of worlds in Deltarune goes like this. Layer 1, the actual world that you and I exist in, the world where Gaster is a Twitter user, and the one where you're currently desperately searching for Deltarune crackpot theories on YouTube to accelerate the rotting of your brain. Layer 2, the light world, where Hometown is located and what the Lightners would identify as the real world. The dark world, where the fun gang go on their adventures to seal dark fountains. Rouse in Chapter 3 clarified what we essentially already expected about the dark worlds in that they are fantasy worlds that come into existence when the light that's absent in the dark is further removed until you reach the other side. This is Layer 3. But for a character like Striped Bird to have been present from the very beginning, and for it to have this otherworldly quality about it that's reminiscent of Goner's, and the fact that it's the Deltarune version of a Gaster follower that has no analogous NPC in Undertale, it makes me think that the light world shouldn't be viewed as a layer of reality that exists above the dark world. If Striped Bird was an NPC whose strange state deteriorated over time into what we see in Chapter 4, I would say that the three-tiered version of reality we've assumed is correct is decaying, and that the dark world is beginning to bleed into the light world, which would be believable since the premise of the roaring is that light and dark are out of balance, and as darkness begins to bleed into the light world, anomalous events occur. But that's not the case. Striped Bird being fucked up from the beginning doesn't hint at the deepest layer of reality bleeding into the layer above it. It hints that the light world and dark worlds should be viewed as the same tier of reality, despite what the characters seem to think. Why would something as anomalous as Striped Bird exist in a real world? I can hear you asking, but why does any of that even matter? At the end of the day, so what if the dark world and light world are more side by side instead of one above, one below? Because it requires us to view Gaster's perspective from a different lens. The way some of the Lightners in Hometown talk about the bunker, and the chase scene where we see the Knight take Undyne to the bunker support the need to shift the way we think about the layering of Deltarune's world. If the dark world was truly a layer of reality beneath the light world, it surprises me that higher status Lightners seem to be aware that there is something ominous about the bunker that Kris and Susie shouldn't be involving themselves in. The bunker is clearly related to Dark Worlds, as we literally see the darkness coming out of it during the moment where the bunker doors open, and there are Lightners in Hometown who clearly have enough authority to be able to access it. The phone call in the Holiday residence also lets us know that Kris and Susie are not the only Lightners who are aware of what Dark Worlds are. The information we've been presented about the bunker also don't suggest that whatever it is that the Lightners are afraid of about the bunker is a new event. This matters because whatever it is that connects the bunker to the Dark World is probably not a new phenomenon. The depths, where Gaster and the person in the unused text, Des, are likely confined to, seems more like the actual third tier of reality. Or maybe it could be better described as unreality. The information we've gotten in chapters 3 and 4 paint Gaster's perspective as being beneath both the light and the dark worlds, but not of the light and dark worlds having a vertical relationship with each other. It explains why Gaster is unconcerned about the state of either of them. The consequences of the Weird Route starting to bleed into the light world? Uninteresting. The Weird Route is just one possibility of a few likely paths the story can take. The roaring, breaking the balance of light and dark and destroying the world? Irrelevant. The roaring is an event that can and, according to the prophecy, will happen. Gaster is concerned with the impossible, not the possible, and certainly not the inevitable. Moving on to our final point that connects Gaster to who is likely our true protagonist. Susie's entire motivation is overcoming the impossible. Gerson's character arc in Chapter 4 is being the wise sage that encourages the discouraged hero that she has the ability to write her own story. Susie discovering whatever tragedy is at the end of the prophecy is met with her determination to subvert what is supposed to be a foregone conclusion. The ending that Susie desires is one where an end doesn't even exist. That's the kind of thing Gaster is interested in. Whether this hints at Gaster being an antagonistic figure or a supportive figure is totally unclear at this point, but I think that Susie is being set up to be someone that Gaster would find very, very interesting. I'm still kind of in shock over these chapters. I think we all thought that Susie having to grapple with the fact that the dark worlds aren't real and that Rousey doesn't exist in the light world was going to be like a lot bigger conflict than it actually ended up being. When she handled it so gracefully, I kind of knew. I was like, oh shit. Like, if she handled this so well, then like whatever's going to be the real conflict that she has to grapple with is going to be way, way darker. We're only about a month out from the initial release of the chapters, and I still feel like myself and everyone else talking about the chapters right now have kind of only begun scratching the surface of like what's still there to talk about. As I was researching this video, I kept coming across more and more things that I kind of held off elaborating on because I'm like, well, damn, like this could be a whole like discussion in itself. And like I feel like there are just so many instances of things like that. Whether you largely agree or disagree with the points that I made in this video, I would really love to hear what you think about it. One of the things that I really love about the Deltarune community is that it really does feel like a collaborative research effort. If you liked the video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel because there's a lot more to come. And yes, on my Weird Rat playthrough, I did make Rousey smile, and I felt really bad about it.